week, if you remember, I based my homily on this week's gospel. And so I decided I would preach my homily this week on last week's gospel, which I did not preach yet. So to remind you about that one, this is the one where Jesus' disciples are criticized because they are eating with unclean, that is, unwashed hands. They're not following the tradition of the elders. It's basically a law put into effect for those who were priests in the temple that he got to be applied to everybody. And then later on, Jesus talks, quoting from Isaiah, "This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines, human precepts." And then he goes on to talk about what it means to be truly pure. What is purity? Purity is not something that just simply is on the outside, it's what's on the inside. And he says, from within people, from their hearts come evil thoughts, unchastity, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, licentiousness, evil, blasphemy, arrogance, folly. All these evils come from within, and they make someone impure. So, basing my thoughts today on that homily, on that gospel, I'd like to address the issues once again. I did 2 weeks ago, and I will again today, to kind of give more information or more understanding around the issues the church is facing right now in this whole sexual abuse crisis. So to start off with an understanding about an important concept, boundaries. Boundaries that exist between people. These boundaries are important. They keep relationships in check. For instance, a boss with an employee. There needs to be a certain professional boundary between those two people, so that that which goes with something like friendship doesn't necessarily enter into that relationship. And so a boss who asks an employee to go out on a date, even if he's free to do that, he's walking across the boundary that needs to be respected. There's also boundaries that we understand from everyday life between parents and children. Unfortunately, sometimes parents have made the mistake of wanting to be friends with their children. They think that by simply reasoning with them in some way, shape, or form, like a friend would reason with a friend, they'll be able to get them to do what's important and right. Parents can't walk across that boundary without messing up the relationship. Parents are meant to care for, guide, and direct their children. They're not meant to be friends. Later on, when the kids grow up and become adults and are out on their own, there is a kind of friendship that happens between parents and kids, but that is different, even a different relationship from a relationship that never had that unequal relationship of parent to child. And it even becomes more apparent in our lives when we enter into those situations where we as children end up having to take care of our parents in some way. We have to literally sometimes make decisions for the good of our parents. It's extremely painful. Why? Because that's not the relationship we're used to. We're used to a relationship of parents to child. The same kind of thing can be talked about when it comes to priests or bishops' relationship to the people that they serve. There's a certain boundary. I thirst for relationships, I like to have friendships and all that, but I recognize too that I need to find those friendships in my peers. And there's where I can kind of let my hair down, for what's left of it anyway, let my hair down to visit with them and talk about things. And so there's always that professional relationship that exists. And that relationship is important because it protects both sides. And so, my relationship to kids, or to young adults, or to young people, is always going to be in that relationship of parent to child. It's that kind of a relationship. And just as a parent would never do anything to harm their children, so too is the responsibility of someone who is a shepherd to make sure they never harm anybody. What we've understood and what we've discovered in psychology, psychiatry over the past basically century, but applying it to this particular problem of sexual abuse over the past, let's say 50 years or so, all of society has become much more attuned to the fact that this happens. It doesn't just happen in the church, it happens to lots of people, within families, within that other uncle who lives a long ways off, some neighbor across the street. What the church is being focused on right now are the issues related to those who are leaders of the church doing these crimes, doing these hurts on people. The other thing we've discovered over the past century, to maybe for sure the past 50 years, is that these kinds of things that happen, sexual abuse type of things, really create such a wound in the person because of the breaking of those boundaries and the abuse of the power the one has over the other to keep a secret. Those things become lodged in a person's psyche, and it's so difficult for us to deal with that for years on end. We might go to counseling, we might go to experience some sort of healing. Just to give a perspective on this, we're much more attuned today to those kinds of wounds that hurt people and how they can play out in a person's life. For instance, just maybe, 30 years ago, you would never thought of needing to bring together a bunch of first responders to talk about what they've seen and what they went through with respect to a major accident that took place. Today, we understand that's so important to deal with that, because the hurts that happen to a person, psychological, are things that are important to be dealt with. Yesterday there was a good article in the World Herald about that, about how first responders need to be able to talk about those things. So, we understand these things better now, and we have to be respectful of those people and incidents that do that, make sure that they don't do it again. So the zero tolerance policy that we have in our church today is a tolerance policy that's actually starting to be applied across the board in other places in the world. The problem is that we have in our church uncovered recently the fact that those people who have these penchants and have these sins in their lives weren't taken out of the scene. They were simply transferred to another place, and they continue to harm. And so the bishops now are on the hot seat because they're the ones who did that. They're the ones who, quote, covered up all of that. For the past 15 years, the policy is totally different in our own diocese. It does not happen anymore. No one, the bishop, the way Lucas puts it, is that there is no priest or deacon working in our diocese right now that has any kind of accusation against them. So, we worked painfully over the past few years to try to clean up our act and to make sure that we put up enough walls to make sure that this doesn't happen and ways for it to be dealt with when it does. First of all, calling the authorities, civil authorities, and secondly, removing the person from ministry until the process of investigation is finished and we determine whether it's true or not. So, these boundary violations, these kinds of things that hurt people, are things we're becoming much more understanding of right now. And so the world we live in today is really different from the world of 75 years ago when it comes to this matter. Our church must move then, in this period of time, back out into the light. In other words, to become transparent with the things that have happened, to let people know how things were dealt with, and to get those things out of the open. Speaking of that issue around secrecy, I encourage you to read Archbishop Lucas's article in the Catholic Voice this week. He says something in that article, and the way he's doing it with the new editor of the Catholic Voice, he does it kind of in an interview format. They ask him a question, he answers it. And so he shares his own frustration as a bishop trying to make a decision over another bishop. And it was his predecessor in the Springfield Diocese when he was bishop there. And he shares that in that article. So to read it, he talks about that frustration because in the structures of the church, who was over the bishop? The Pope. And the Pope lives a long ways away. And so to get the problem that might be here locally into the hands of the Vatican, and then to have them act on it, and then to have them act on it in such a way that it's public, that's what we're dealing with now. And that's the part that has to be fixed. I'm hoping that they move in the right direction with all of that. But you know what? That's not my pay grade, and so I can't do anything more than make my comments about it, which is just blowing smoke. I'm just hoping that when I have the opportunity, to speak to my own bishop or to make some input into this whole problem, I do that. But right now, I take care of business right here and make sure that we're all safe. We're doing what we can to keep our kids safe and make sure that our safe environments or the background checks are all taken care of. So in that gospel, Jesus talks about taking human traditions and turning them into dogmas. And then he goes on to talk about one of those traditions, which has to do with the washing of cups and jugs and kettles. And then he goes on to say, this external stuff that we're doing to try to keep ourselves pure is not as important as what goes on inside. So what we found out, we continually find out, is that there's a lot of good stuff happening in the church that reflects the good stuff inside. But we've discovered enough rot inside here and there to say, we got to clean this up. We got to make sure that what's on the outside is what's on the inside, what's on the inside is what's on the outside, and they're all pure, and they're all good. So, when people leave the church because of these sort of problems, I don't necessarily blame them. They're frustrated, they're upset, they're angry. It might even bring up hurts that they've experienced in their lives, either by the church or by someone else, and they think we haven't done anything about it. So in the World Herald today, there's a letter to the editor from a lady that is actually sticking up for the church, and it's a very well-written letter, and it's kind of nice, but you know what? We're at a point right now in the church where I couldn't write that letter. If Father Owen Forty was the title editor, people would have discounted what I said, because that's what's happened. The trust factor is then hurt so bad. But this was a woman, a lay woman who wrote the letter, and she carries a lot more weight today. And so like I said 2 weeks ago, it's the laity that will bring holiness back to the church. I know a couple things, and these are the things that help me wade through problems like this. And when I look back over 30 some years of priesthood, wow, the stuff that I've gone through. Gee, many crickets. So many priests who I was ordained with, leaving the priesthood, people who taught me in high school that were priests, no longer priests today. The scandal of this sexual abuse stuff that started happening in 2002 when it really started coming out. Weathering that storm, and now coming to this storm right now. I'm kind of glad I'm up here in Harlingen, where most things out there are green. Unfortunately, this past week or so, I spent some time out in that area of the parish down there where that strip of hail took place. And I kind of think that's kind of what this problem in the church feels like. When you get into the middle of it, it feels like it's really sad to see those corn stalks and the beans totally gone. And for those farmers in that area, my heart goes out to you. But symbolically, that's kind of like our church. We got all this beautiful stuff all around us, but then we got this area out there that's just dead. Didn't produce anything. And that's what this situation is kind of like for me. But in the midst of that, I know something else. I know, number one, that the heart of the church is the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit lives in this church, this community of people. Secondly, I know that this church was founded by my Savior, Jesus Christ, who is Son of God. I know also that this church has a mother, and her name is the Blessed Virgin Mary, and she is not happy with what's going on. So I have you two little stories that kind of illustrate this. The first part is cleaning up what's inside and making sure that what we are on the outside might look so good. It better look good on the inside too. So this guy goes to heaven, and he's walking around checking out the place, and he runs into Jesus. And Jesus says to him, come on over here, I'm going to show you something. And they go over, and Jesus lifts up this great big door. It's kind of like a trap door. He says, take a look. So the guy looks down, and he sees his church. And he sees all the people in church, and he sees them all going to Mass. But he can't hear anything. He hears the priest, sees the priest, lips moving, and pages turning. And the choir sitting over there, and he sees them holding the choir books. And the people are responding, but he doesn't hear anything. So he says, there must be something wrong with the PA system. Jesus told him, no, there's a rule up here. When people are down there aren't doing it from their heart, we can't hear it. So let's not just go through the actions. Let's make sure that we clean up not only our own lives, but hopefully as the people, good people who want to make our church that spotless bride of Christ will do what's right to make sure that we have the procedures and the mechanisms to keep our church holy and to clean up what is here. And the last thought is kind of a little bit of a humorous one, and it has to do with Mary as a mother. Now I think some moms, every so often they have a teenage son, and that teenage son has a tendency maybe to get his room a little messy. Most boys don't do that. They're all very neat, I know. But sometimes there's a boy who's just really a mess. And she decides all she's going to do is close the door. He's not even going to look at it. And she cajoles him and tells him to clean his room. He makes a little bit of an effort at it. Finally, she has had it. And she opens that door, and she goes in that room, and she brings her garbage back, and everything starts to fly. By the time it's over with, that room is clean, and the son is upset because she threw out something. And she said to him, you had a chance to clean this up by yourself. You didn't. And I think about that with the Blessed Virgin Mary as Mother of the Church. She's looking down at us and she's saying, you know what? You guys haven't cleaned up the church, but I'm going to go in there and take care of it. So that's my hope as we pray our prayers in this messy situation, that the Blessed Virgin Mary is one person.